For a long time, we've been taught that being intelligent means getting good grades, solving an equation quickly, or scoring high on an IQ test. But what if that only shows a small part of what your brain is capable of? What if someone who struggles with mathematics can understand people better than anyone else? What if someone who performs poorly in school can create music, solve problems with their body, understand nature, or see patterns that nobody else notices? That is where an idea that changed the way many people think about intelligence comes in. The theory of multiple intelligences, associated with psychologist Howard Gardner. The idea is that intelligence may not be a single ability that you have more or less of, but a combination of different abilities. And today, we're investigating the 9 types of intelligence commonly associated with this theory. But there's a problem. The idea of multiple intelligences is extremely popular, but science does not consider it proven that there are exactly 9 independent intelligences working this way. So we're not going to treat this as a diagnosis or as absolute scientific fact. What's interesting is understanding the concept and discovering which of these abilities you may naturally be stronger in. And maybe, by the end of this investigation, you'll realize that the question, "Am I intelligent?" is completely wrong. The better question might be, how exactly am I intelligent? Let's start with the first one. The first is linguistic intelligence. It is the ability to use words effectively. People with this ability tend to be good at writing, storytelling, arguing, explaining ideas, and noticing nuances in language. They are the kind of people who can take a complicated idea and turn it into a simple sentence. Writers, journalists, teachers, lawyers, and screenwriters may rely heavily on this ability. It sounds simple, but here's the first problem. Being good with words doesn't necessarily mean being good at everything. Someone can write a brilliant essay and still struggle to interpret a graph, understand a machine, or navigate an unfamiliar space. And this already starts to break one idea we've carried since childhood, that there is one single scale of intelligence. Now think about someone who can look at a building, a map, or an object, and immediately imagine how it works in 3 dimensions. That is spatial intelligence. It's the second one. It involves perceiving shapes, distances, positions, and relationships between objects. Architects, designers, engineers, photographers, and people who work with navigation may rely heavily on this ability. But there's a problem. You can be excellent at imagining objects in space and still struggle to explain exactly what you're seeing in your head. In other words, 2 people can look at the exact same problem and see completely different things. One thinks in words, the other thinks in images, and neither one is necessarily more intelligent. They are using different tools. Now let's move to the third, logical mathematical intelligence. This is probably the one that most closely matches the traditional idea of being smart. It involves identifying patterns, working with numbers, reasoning, testing hypotheses, and solving problems in a structured way. It's the brain that looks at a problem and thinks, there must be a logic behind this. Mathematicians, programmers, scientists, and engineers may use this ability extensively. But here's another problem. If you're not naturally good with numbers, that doesn't mean your brain is less intelligent. You may simply have more ability in another area. And that takes us to one of the most interesting forms of intelligence, musical intelligence. People with musical intelligence can perceive rhythm, melody, tone, sound patterns, and musical structures with greater ease. Some can hear a song once and reproduce a sequence of notes. Others can notice tiny differences in pitch or rhythm that go completely unnoticed by everyone else. It may look like an artistic skill, but something much deeper is happening. The brain is identifying patterns. And that brings us back to the problem. If music involves patterns, perception, and memory, why do we call someone who is excellent at music talented, while someone who is excellent at mathematics is called intelligent? Maybe part of the problem is exactly the way we choose to measure intelligence. But we're still far from finished. The fifth is Bodily-Kinesthetic intelligence. It is the ability to use your body with precision, coordination, and efficiency. Think about athletes, dancers, surgeons, craftspeople, and professionals who need to control delicate movements. An athlete can perceive the position of their body in a fraction of a second. A surgeon can perform extremely precise movements in a tiny space. That is also information processing. But there's a problem. Traditional schools rarely reward this type of intelligence in the same way they reward mathematics or language. A child can be incredibly physically skilled and still hear for years that they are not intelligent because they struggle in certain academic subjects. And that can create a huge consequence. The person starts believing the evaluation. They start thinking, I'm not smart. When in reality, maybe they were simply never evaluated on the ability where they were strongest. And now we reach one of the forms of intelligence that may be even more important in everyday life. Interpersonal intelligence. It is the ability to understand other people, to perceive emotions, intentions, behaviors, and social relationships. Some people walk into a room and quickly notice who is uncomfortable, who is hiding something, who needs help, and how different people might react to a particular situation. This can be extremely valuable for leaders, teachers, negotiators, salespeople, therapists, and anyone who works directly with other people. But here's a new problem. Understanding other people doesn't necessarily mean understanding yourself. You can be excellent at noticing what others are feeling and still have no idea why you are feeling the way you do. And that is exactly where intrapersonal intelligence comes in. It is the ability to understand yourself, your feelings, your thoughts, your patterns, your strengths, your limits, your desires. A person with strong intrapersonal intelligence can observe their own mind and ask, why did I react that way? What is actually bothering me? Why do I keep repeating this behavior? It sounds simple, but it isn't. Because the more you begin to understand yourself, the more you realize there is another problem. Knowing yourself doesn't automatically mean you can change yourself. You can know exactly why you procrastinate and still keep procrastinating. You can know that a certain situation is hurting you and still keep going back to it. You can understand your fears and still be controlled by them. So intelligence does not necessarily equal action, and that distinction matters. Now let's leave the individual mind and look at something much bigger. Naturalistic intelligence. It is the ability to recognize, classify, and understand patterns in the natural world. Animals, plants, environments, natural phenomena, and relationships between living things. Think about someone who can walk into a forest and notice differences between species you didn't even know existed. That person is processing information that other people simply ignore. But there's a problem. Modern society has often moved us away from this kind of awareness. You can spend weeks staring at a screen and still be unable to identify 5 species of trees around you. That doesn't mean your brain lacks the ability. It means different environments value different skills. And then we reach the intelligence that may be the hardest one to explain. Existential intelligence. It is associated with the ability to think deeply about fundamental questions of existence. Why are we here? What does it mean to be alive? What happens when we die? Is there a purpose? What is our place in the universe? People drawn to philosophy, religion, science, cosmology, or major questions about existence may identify strongly with this kind of thinking. But here's a problem that is even bigger. How do you measure it? How do you give someone a score from 0 to 10 for their ability to think about existence? And this is exactly where the theory of multiple intelligences faces one of its biggest scientific challenges. Some of these abilities may overlap. They may be related to broader cognitive abilities. And the existence of exactly 9 completely independent intelligences is not something science has established by consensus. So maybe you're thinking, then is all of this useless? No, And here is the most interesting part. Even if you don't treat these 9 categories as 9 scientifically proven independent intelligences, they can still be a useful way to think about different human abilities. Because there is something traditional tests may not fully capture: the way a person turns information into action. Think about a child who gets poor grades in mathematics, but can calm down an entire room when everyone is arguing. Think about someone who doesn't like writing, but can take apart a machine and figure out exactly how it works. Think about someone who can't memorize formulas, but can hear a song and reproduce it almost immediately. Think about someone who doesn't stand out in any traditional subject, but deeply understands their own emotions and can make better decisions because of it. Does it really make sense to look at all these people and simply say, this person is more intelligent than that person? Maybe not. But there's an even bigger problem. If we start believing that each person has one fixed type of intelligence, we can fall into another trap. I'm musical, so I'm not good at math. I'm linguistic, so I don't have spatial intelligence. I'm bad at school, so I'm not intelligent. That would simply mean replacing one box with another. The idea should not be used to limit you. It should be used to expand the question. Because abilities can be developed. You can train your memory. You can learn mathematics. You can improve your communication. You can develop spatial awareness. You can learn music. You can learn to understand your own emotions better. The human brain is not a collection of 9 locked boxes. And that may be the most important consequence of this entire investigation. For a long time, many people went through life believing they were unintelligent because they didn't fit the model of intelligence that school, tests, or society valued. Some of them may genuinely have had specific cognitive difficulties, but others may simply have had different strengths that were never recognized. And now imagine a child growing up believing they are stupid because they can't solve an equation as quickly as their classmates. But that same child can build incredible things with their hands, understand people, create stories, or recognize patterns in nature. If someone tells them for years that they aren't intelligent, there is a dangerous consequence. They may stop trying to discover what they are good at. And this is where the investigation stops being just about psychology and starts touching something much bigger. Because maybe the most important question isn't which of the 9 intelligences you have. Maybe it's how many different forms of intelligence we still don't know how to measure. Maybe there are human abilities that our current tests simply cannot capture. And maybe you have spent years trying to win a game using an ability that was never your greatest strength. So now, I want to do something different. Don't just tell me whether you consider yourself intelligent. I want to know which of these abilities you think you are strongest in. Language, logic, space, music, body, relationships with other people, understanding yourself, nature, or existential thinking. And more importantly, which one would you like to develop? Tell me in the comments. I'll read the comments, and who knows, your answer might become part of the next investigation. Because after all of this, there is one conclusion that is difficult to ignore. Intelligence isn't just about knowing answers. Sometimes intelligence is knowing how to ask questions that nobody else thought to ask. And maybe the most important question is this: what if you are much more intelligent than you think, but you've been trying to prove it in the wrong place? Case closed.